Here.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Vice President Darrow.
Here.
President McClelland.
Here. Ask everyone to stand, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Looking at tonight's meeting agenda, any additions to the agenda this evening?
President McClellan, there is an addendum agenda with a general business item and a personnel action item.
With that addition to the agenda, could I have a motion for approval of tonight's agenda? Mr. Darrow, second. I'll give it to Mr. Newmoff. Roll call, please.
Vice President Darrow.
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Mr. Bush.
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
President McClelland.
Yes. Moving along to discussion items, Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you, President McClellan. We begin this evening with policy for board consideration and review and or adoption. The first is a career advising policy that's requirement by statute for update every 2 years. So it's presented this evening for first reading. Second readings this evening are the 5000 series, specifically to update student handbooks. Student handbooks are on their way to the Board of Education at the end of the month. These are the final policy updates that are required to be incorporated into those handbooks, specifically for students in the 5000 series. Second reading this evening on children and youth in foster care. This is the federal requirement for free and reduced lunch to adopt a policy that incorporates the charge policy and the requirements necessary for students under federal statute that receive free and reduced lunch to continue to be eligible and or have the right to charge lunch if so necessary. And then the last section this evening are the proposed changes to board policy for first reading. We present to you a series of policies in the personnel sections for 3000 and 4000, specifically on employment of substitutes, summer school or adult education employment, and employment for co-curricular and extracurricular activities, as well as 3 policies in the 6000 series for operations related to purchasing agreements for cooperative, local, and vendor. They incorporate the statutory changes that have recently happened through the state legislature. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions related to board policies that are presented for discussion and or review.
Any questions tonight? Okay, thank you. Next item.
Next on the agenda, it's my pleasure to welcome our guests from the city and EMH&T. Adrienne Jolly, I believe, is first this evening for the city of New Albany. She's coming forward with Jeff Pagonis, Todd Cunningham, and Larry Creed to share information, as I teased at last month's meeting, about an exciting project for the Rose Run corridor and the Rose Run Park that'll be revamped and renovated here for the city of New Albany. So with that, Adrienne Jolly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I don't know many of you, so I get to read your names in the paper or hear about you in the community a lot, but it really means a lot to be here before you today to talk about the Rose Run Park project. I don't know if many of you have heard about the concept of a park at the Rose Run, but it has been, I think, kind of stuck in the minds of the community back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the city got a grant to acquire the parkland that is currently exists today behind the library and put in those original paths that people walk on today, and they've been in place since about 2000. Since that time, council made some additional improvements, mainly through grant dollars, a new park segment behind the Ely House. We worked to put a streamside classroom that I hope the environmental science program uses close to the Ely House. And we've made these sort of incremental improvements along the way to that stream corridor, but we haven't really achieved what that original vision is, to have a really strong park behind the library and really connect the school campus in a more meaningful way into Market Square. It's a little bit, people have described it as creepy now, today, as it currently stands. It really does provide a nice green backdrop to the community, but it's not really functional in the sense that people can get back and forth easily with a lot of visibility and safety. So last year, City Council challenged us as a staff to come up with a master plan for what could become of that space and how do we really turn that into park area. We did a master plan with our partners MKSK last year, presented it to council in the fall, And council authorized us as a staff to enter into design contract with MKSK and EMH&T, a local traffic engineering and civil engineering firm, to take a design of the park to what we're calling the 30% design level. And that's, we're nearing that phase in the process. We're going to present the 30% design and a cost estimate to City Council in August. But through this design process, Michael and Patrick have been very generous with their time, have met with us a couple times, really have been instrumental in informing us about some of the challenges to circulation in the campus area, what the needs of the campus are, and then what the district's own master plan calls for. And those have informed the design that we'll show to you tonight. So we are here to take you through both on the design level, some of the goals that we hope to achieve with this new park, and Jeff Pongonis with the landscape architecture and planning firm MKSK is here to take you through that presentation. And then Todd Cunningham and Larry Krieg with EMH&T are here to take you through our traffic study, because we know any changes to this road corridor are going to have big impacts to the community. Certainly the campus on two really peak parts of the day rely on Dublin-Granville Road heavily to get in and out in a safe manner. And then really the intent of tonight is just to bring you up to speed with the design as it stands today in advance to going to council, but also to get your feedback. Certainly the goals of this project, I think, are largely aligned with what some of the district's goals are in terms of improving safety along this corridor, and especially as children and students go back and forth between the library and Starbucks and campus, and hopefully this project can make that a safer connection for them. But certainly any feedback you have tonight, or if you go away and think about it, we're happy to take that moving forward as well. So thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Again, my name's Jeff Pongonis from MKSK. We've been working in New Albany for quite a while now, and excited to participate with the city and EMH&T and you all on this great project. I'm not sure how aware you all are of the project, but please stop me at any given time if you want some more detail or want me to slow down. As Adrian pointed out, we're nearing our 30% completion mark, which is kind of a typical point in a big project like this to look back on the design, look back on the engineering, and reflect on the price and make sure all those things are in alignment. So this is kind of a checkup design in anticipation of that. So I'll scroll through some things here real quick. This project is really a unique opportunity to connect all the great assets that are right here near the Learning Campus. Market Square, the historic center, and this great corridor that runs along Rose Run. This is really a great opportunity to take advantage of all that stuff and use it as a tool to connect all these pieces and parts together for the residents of New Albany to utilize. I want to start with kind of a mechanical part of this project. It's not quite as exciting as the rest of it, but I just want to start here since it borders you so closely. What you're looking at on the screen right now is our today condition for Dublin-Granville Road. So where you see the two cars and the label Dublin-Granville Road, that's kind of a rural roadway condition today, meaning it's a curbless road with a swale, more of a, like I said, rural condition. The road's a little bit wider than it needs to be. There's very kind of loose infrastructure along this roadway. Along the north side, we've got the leisure trail. Along the south side of the road, we've just got landscape and the horse fence that connects us up to the creek. So that's the today condition. What we're pushing for is, kind of a combination of infrastructure improvements and city goals here. So here's our new condition, what we're proposing. Dublin-Granville Road will transition to a more urban street section. So it'll be two 12-foot lanes and a traditional curb. So the street itself narrows just a little bit as we transition to that curb section. Along the south side of the road now, what we're introducing is a new bike path and a new walking path.
So the city's calling this the Velo Loop. This is the first piece of the bike loop that will introduce to the city right here. We're showing an 8-foot bike path and a 6-foot walkway, and then south of that will be connected right into this new parkway. So this will be a really great bikeway, walkway, a place to jog. It'll be a really fantastic connection to the school on the north and the village center to the south. So this will be a great improvement and really be the bridge between what we have today along the street with not a lot of great connections, and our new system, which will be much better connected. So here's the plan. This is sort of where we back out and look at the entire thing. So we've got the Learning Campus to the north, and then you'll see a series of things on here. I know this is difficult to read if you're looking at a smaller image there, but if I could just kind of point some of these components out here. Dublin Granville Road and the new streetscape improvements, big part of the project. At the center of the project is a place where we are sort of the heart of this new neighborhood component. We've got a new plaza here that links the center of the school over to Village Square with a really nice bridge and plaza, which I'll show you in the next few slides. Other components of the project are a new library garden, and we will renovate and sort of update and improve the pathway network through the Rose Run corridor and really transition it from, as Adrian so eloquently described, kind of a creepy, overgrown part of the city to what we're really trying to turn into a park. I can come back to this if you want.
Real quick, sorry.
Sure.
This looks great, by the way. So just for people who may be watching, there is, so currently off of 62 next to the post office, you can turn right into between the Heights Center and the post office, and you can drive all the way through
That's
to
right.
Market Street. That would end
Right.
because there would be the park that would get put into place.
Right, so currently we've got a roadway connection, very good point, thanks for pointing that out. A roadway connection that stems all the way east to west through Market Square behind the library. What we're proposing would be a connection over the creek and down to the library uninterrupted by parking or roadways. So those sort of components would be this bridge and walkway and this new library garden. So the piece of road that we would be getting rid of is right here. And from a parking standpoint, we've made some improvements and adjustments that really make it kind of a parking neutral move for people visiting Market Square.
So the community connection is a pedestrian only, or that's pedestrian and vehicles?
Pedestrian only. Yep.
We'll see it in just a second.
So here's a kind of an illustration of the bridge. So right now we're kind of hovering over the school campus, looking southward towards the library. So the components that you're looking at, what we're proposing are some sort of landscape low steps or stone bench seating along the lawn as you enter the campus. A really nice plaza that would bridge the school grounds over to the pedestrian bridge and Rose Run Creek. A little bit of seating, a little bit of landscape, a little bit of planting, nice amenity space as you enter southward, and then a pedestrian bridge that would link you right up to the new library gardens and over to Market Square. And the bridge is really meant to be something that's almost plaza-like, a place to stop and hang out. We might have some furniture there. It'll be well lit, so it's a really engaging, attractive place for pedestrians, not just sort of a wood trail bridge like we have in some of the other places along the creek. So this is really meant to, connect all the different uses together in a really fantastic way and a kind of a point of pride for the city. So this is an image, kind of a really tight image, just to show you what we're thinking for materials and textures as you get down onto the ground there. So this would be the school grounds heading this way, and then this would be your connection across the street over to the bridge. So the point here is that this is, you know, beautiful and fits into New Albany, but it's also a safe place for pedestrians and students to cross. So we've got a really special treatment on the sidewalk and on the roadways, and we are working diligently to make sure that traffic has the ability, this sort of, you know, multiple cues to slow down as you enter this part of Dublin Granville Road to, you know, pay special attention to all the pedestrian traffic. And we're really, you know, one of the other goals here is to make this a special place to cross so that other places are less attractive to cross. And we try to focus, you know, pedestrians in this zone. And this would also be a great place for, you know, a race or a run or some kind of community event where folks can gather.
The plaza, what part of the street is that directly across from?
Is it better in this image?
Cafeteria loop.
That's what I thought, okay.
Where the limestone steps are at the bottom,
Yeah.
where Jeff pointed out, that's actually the middle school, high school cafeteria loop right
Okay.
there,
Yeah, so here's.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
directly across.
So before we get into the kind of, you know, more beautiful aesthetic picture here, this is a technical drawing illustrating what the pedestrian bridge looks like. Just a few components that I want to point out. It's about a 60-foot span from pole to pole, and it provides for a bike traffic to go underneath. So we're trying to be sensitive to the scale of this place and not build too much of a bridge, too big, too hulking of a structure. But we do need to make sure that this thing works for pedestrians and cyclists. So that's kind of our gauge on height of this particular bridge. Sort of luckily, the two sides of the creek are just about the same elevation. So the bridge doesn't have to do anything funny like climb up or climb down as it's crossing. So this is looking down the creek, and then this component right here is looking at the overlook as if you were standing here looking that way. So you can imagine the school is back here, and you're up on the plaza, and this wall is right here. Not really easy to explain in this section, but you'll see in further illustrations what that looks like. So just up from the pedestrian bridge is the library garden. And we see this as a pretty casual place. We spent a little bit of time with the library. They're not interested in a big extravagant place, but this will have the ability to connect folks in the library to outdoor space and also provide a place for small events, a fundraiser, a small movie night, or a community event, something like that. So we think this will be a nice addition and will be sort of open and free space. It won't be walled in or fenced in. This will be part of the park that's open to use at any point. So here's the library garden. You can't see it because we always overpromise on trees, but I'm looking south again towards the library. So the program elements here are a small plaza for library users. The library, we believe, is going to put a couple new doors in so that you'll be able to access that courtyard from the library itself. And then this greater lawn area here, which will connect you right out into the new landscape and new park. So here's an enlargement of the bridge area and the landscape, and really just some illustrations to show kind of what we're thinking about here. So The bridge will have, we think the bridge is going to have a lawn panel running across it. So if you want to, you know, put down a blanket or read a book, you can do that. It'll be a pretty casual place. But we'll also have some paths and some, you know, kind of landscape stones that help you step down into the creek and, you know, experience the park in a more informal way than crossing the bridge. So here's an image of the bridge. This would be looking east. This is the overlook. The school's back here. So you can kind of get a sense for the scale of the place. We're going to be doing a lot of landscape renovation. So we're going to be planting a lot of trees. We're going to be moving a lot of earth. You're going to see, you know, a fair amount of new material in place, including ground cover, new pathways, new lighting along the paths, etc. So it should be a great place for people to walk, bike, jog, you know, anything you can imagine. That's what I have. Any questions before Todd comes up for traffic?
I'm curious, a project like this, what's the time frame? I mean, forget when it actually is approved to go.
Yeah.
When you, I mean, this is a pretty massive project. So how long would something like this take to complete?
So we're still being really ambitious because
Okay.
we can be because it's early. We think it's at least an 18 to 24 month construction project. Certainly, probably a little bit longer because we're going to have to plan around the school calendar and make sure that the construction sequencing doesn't impact closures and that kind of stuff will have to probably occur over 2 summers. So our time frame, if council authorizes us in August to proceed with full plans, we'd like to have those done first of the year, go out to bid in the spring, and then kick off sometime spring, early summer, and then certainly that sequencing will work in close contact with all of you to make sure it doesn't have any impact. It's a big project. I mean, you look at it overhead and you're like, well, that's not that much, but then you start thinking about the road, it's half-mile road, you know, trails, the plaza, the parking reconfiguration. It's a pretty big endeavor.
So would you be thinking, is the road something that happens first, or is it the cleanup of all of the area around the creek and that kind of development, or am I jumping ahead of myself and I need to let you talk about traffic?
Well, he's going to talk about traffic. Certainly, we will have some of that occur concurrently, like the cleanup within the creek corridor. We always like to give our best guess, and then contractors will tell us how we're wrong and how that sequencing will have to change. But certainly, Todd might have some more to add.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you'll notice if you go out there today, there's actually some work in progress right now. We had some arborists come out to look at some very surgical potential safety issues within the corridor of the existing path. So there's actually some work being done, taking down all of the ash trees. I think they pulled out close to 100 dead ash trees and clearing out limbs that are dangerous and falling over. So if you were to go down to that corridor today, some of that work is in progress. I think they buttoned it up a little bit for the 4th of July, but there's still a few days of work that's being completed as weather permitting to get in there. So big difference in what you would see if you went down there as opposed to this creepy, tangled, overgrown mess into something that looks like it's been taken care of a little bit at this point. So in terms of sequencing, that does kind of segue into traffic and some of the things that we're looking at relative to how it flows and work that can be done during school and such. So I'm Todd Cunningham with EMH&T, by the way. Sorry to just jump in here. Thank you, Patrick. So we identified early on in this process that traffic is concerning to a lot of stakeholders on this project. So one of the first things that we did was to build on previous work. There's been a lot of traffic studies done in the town center area. So all the intersections you see highlighted here in blue, whether they're entrances to the school campus or existing intersections within the town center, including the roundabout. I missed getting the blue circle on the Market and Main roundabout. We actually count that with a video camera and have the video analyzed because there's really not a stop condition. So there's 14 intersections that we went out and did counts before school closed in the spring. So everything we have is as real-time data as we can get for traffic on the way the school was set up to function and was functioning for last school year. Understanding that the traffic flow has to fit into the overall goals of what the master plan is for the school and the master plan for the city and the master plan even for development beyond the village center was another reason why we needed to look at this traffic and update it periodically so that, we're trying to predict the future of what's going to happen. So we need to test that with counts periodically to see if what we've predicted with previous studies is being realized. So the biggest outcomes of the study that we've been working with the school with Michael and his team was that the cafeteria loop for middle school and high school is planned for closure. And as a part of this project, that actually helps us a little bit, maintenance of traffic and construction sequencing, because with that loop closed, you can get to almost 2/3 of Dublin Granville Road without any traffic under a full closure. So we talked about with Michael if that was something, if it was supported by the traffic study and the numbers, which I'll get into a little bit of that in a minute, that we could close that down even at the start of the school year. So people start to get trained in thinking that that loop is not available, because ultimately it will not be available. We are working through some specifics on details of clearly it's needed for emergency access to get fire trucks in there. And if there's a way to do that in accommodations for any special needs drop-offs, it could be a gate, it could be something with an electric reader card or something along those lines. But and again, to the general public, it would be closed off. The other part of this is with the diet that we're putting Dublin Granville Road on to reduce that section to enhance the pedestrian safety, is looking at the intersections at each end of the road. And with all of the additional pedestrian facilities and the bike Vela loop we're adding, are those intersections sized appropriately for the traffic we anticipate, not just from the school campus, but with other development projects occurring within the town center. So we did all those counts and did some analyses and arrived at keyboard. There we go. So this is a kind of a zoomed out view of the overall corridor, and a couple things to note that we did on here. We've adjusted the alignment of the road.
The touch screen. There you go, one more.
We'll just use the keyboard from this point forward. The second slide. So with the addition of the pedestrian facilities on the south side of the road, if you look at the topography out there, and there's certain spots, particularly here at the west end, where you can see the creek gets very close to the road. So we needed to create more space along the south side. So we've come to an alignment that is organized on the central point of the courtyard between middle and high school, that cafeteria loop, and shifted that to the north about 15 feet and came up with an alignment that tied that in to the intersections at each end of the project so that we can create some more space to the south to allow those facilities to be installed. The other thing you'll notice, and I'll show you some detailed pictures of this in a second, is our traffic study showed that the right turn lane at the Dublin Granville Road and Fodor Market Street intersection could be eliminated without adversely impacting the traffic flow. So you'll notice on this exhibit that we do not show that right turn lane. The other thing that it showed us was the left turn lane was oversized. So we've been able to reduce the lane from that left turn lane, even accounting for, only step back for a minute on the traffic we've accounted for. So working with Michael's team, we understand the changes that are going to happen with school start times being staggered with the closure of that central loop, and which student populations are shifting between buildings. So since we had those traffic counts for all those entrances, we had some data that would help us redistribute that traffic to the other school entrances. The other thing we did was work with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission to understand anticipated traffic growth that is kind of beyond the limits of our study, so that we could account for the growth in that background traffic. And then lastly, with some of the undeveloped land in the village center, understanding the New Albany Company's plans for development, like the 2 apartment projects that are under construction right now, the property behind the CVS and some other areas of infill development within the village center. So we worked with the New Albany company to get those projections and layer that traffic into our study. So these are all the things we've accounted for looking to happen within a 10-year horizon.
You're talking about things like as population growth expands further out, Licking County, Johnstown, and all those people who are driving through New Albany to go to work.
Right.
That type of thing.
That's Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the background growth piece of it. Yes. So the intersection over here at Main Street has proven to be a little bit more troublesome. Right now, we're showing that we're maintaining the existing left turn lane there. We have some things to review with the city to look at ways that maybe that turn lane could go away. There's some things I haven't even talked with Adrian about yet, so we have some future discussion there. But for the time being, the plan is we're keeping that left turn lane. But I mean, I know those of you who are familiar with the front of the bungalow know that things get pretty tight at that intersection. So to carry that dedicated bike path and sidewalk through there, things start to get a little bit tight. So to achieve the goals of this study, we're looking at other things that can be done, whether it's the signal timings and other things in our toolkit to, particularly during those peak hours, make sure that intersection will still function if we were to take that left turn lane away. And interestingly enough, the school traffic isn't really the main driver on that. There's enough business traffic that happens after the school hours that really kind of drive the functioning of that intersection. So I guess that's good news in a way, that if we do something to it, it'll be less impactful than anything to do with the school. So the other improvement that's happening is, and I think most of you are probably aware, this one is a new signal to be installed at the High School Boulevard over off of Fodor Road. So this is the existing condition and this diagonal crosswalk, and the crosswalk through the boulevard section kind of set back from the road. And we have kind of some problematic sight lines, and in addition to things not being a straight line, the students are walking the most direct path, and it's not conducive to the vehicle and pedestrian conflicts. So that plan, has that been bid yet, Adrian?
No, it has not.
That will be going to construction sometime this fall.
Yeah, all the underground work will be done through the city's street improvement contract, so that will be done before school starts. The lead time on the mass towers is a lot longer, and so that will be completed.
So this is let's see if I can do the bottom correct. Oh. See, I got two.
I'm confused.
Patrick has the keyboard. Just wait a second.
Well, I was trying to flip between the two so they can kind of get the camera one, camera two. These two. Yeah, those two. So you flip between those a couple
That's the
times.
before, that's the after.
So you can see the crosswalk on the boulevard pulls out closer to the road, which makes pedestrians more visible to people traveling the road. And then we created or reconfiguring this crosswalk to be more on diagonal to the road, shorten the distancing down to that intersection. So
Give me this.
fairly straightforward. The next, go ahead. And
Todd, would that be a timed intersection? Can you talk about that? It won't be on all the time.
Oh, that's right. It'll be during peak hours. It'll be an activated signal, and it'll be on a yellow flasher outside of those peak hours. Sorry. Thank you, Michael. So this is the east or the west end of Bella Granville Road. You can see as it exists today with one lane eastbound, the dedicated left and right turn lanes, and the dedicated through lane. So you can see between those two how we should north. And the reduction in pavement there, and the addition of the pedestrian facilities on the south side of the road. And this is kind of a nice slide because one thing is going to go away, actually two things on here. The utilities along the south side of the road are going to be buried, so there will be no more overhead utilities. And boys, we're going to get rid of the white fence.
On the south side.
On the south side of the road.
Which will be great for children not jumping over it.
So So this shows the east end. You can see the condition here on Bungalow. And so at the west end of that intersection, you can see how we adjusted the alignment to give us some room up in this area. And you can see how if we can eliminate that left turn lane, we can have a little more room here to kind of carry some of those improvements all the way through the intersection. So a few details yet to be worked out, but we think overall what we're finding with the traffic study is the numbers are supporting the vision in a way that still maintains the access to the school campus, consistent with the school's master plan for drop-off and the dedicated bus loops and all those features to maintain the safety level that's been established. We're also looking at spots, we may not have them totally nailed down, but adding a few more mid-block crossings so you don't have to always go to the plaza to get across Rose Run. There'll be other spots connected with the sidewalks that are already there that will allow you to get across there a little bit easier. So you won't have people running across that untoward spots. The other piece that we're maintaining is at the McCoy Loop drop-off right now. It's going to function as it does today. We're going to prohibit left turns out of that intersection. So we're looking at options if there's a way to do that such that it could be temporary in that maybe removable bollards or something that could be removed if there's an event at the McCoy Center to allow full flow of traffic. The other thing you may have seen on these exhibits is the amphitheater that's in the planning stages there at the east end of the project, just kind of north of where we're looking right now on this slide. So for those kind of events, if there's a way to treat that intersection that would allow that to temporarily be fully open, but clearly closed off during school hours in a way that is done appropriately for what the vision of the corridor is. So that's what I have. Larry's here to back me up if there's more technical questions than I can answer, but happy to answer any questions you may have.
So obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious or not, as a community member, I'm happy to see the continued improvements of the city core, the city center. So I think that's a great thing. As a board member, my first question is, other than the impact to traffic, is there any cost to the district associated with these improvements?
Go ahead, Adrian.
That's an important question, and that's been clearly on everyone's mind since day one of this project. Everything we've showed you today is a city cost. And so obviously council will have to make the decision whether to proceed with the project and what the financing of that will be like, but there's no ask of the district or the library. It's important to let you guys know that.
Thank you.
I'm also thrilled by the progress and the suggestions. I guess I could ask again as a board member, were there any considerations for underground? I'm sure there were, where pedestrian traffic would not have to cross the street at all between Market Square and the schools.
That's really interesting. We looked at that with the Market and Main roundabout, actually, if you could do tunnels under that roundabout to increase pedestrian safety. I'm not sure if the topography here would support an underground passageway. Certainly there are its own set of safety concerns when you introduce that sort of facility in terms of not having like eyeballs to see what's going on in the tunnel. That wasn't something we vetted for this project, and I think the topography of the road and the creek probably wouldn't allow for that.
And there would be, and also there is, if you drive by the existing bridge at Fodor Road, there is shallow rock in this area as well. So in addition to the topography and geology and how you would have to configure a tunnel, if we're, a 60-foot span just to get across Rose Run itself, you could end up with a tunnel that might be 120 feet long in order to actually fully make that connection. So in terms of the cost and expense and what that would take relative to the rest of the project budget, we feel like we've come up with a treatment that will address the safety in a much more meaningful way than what it's out there today without having to go to the additional expense of introducing a pedestrian tunnel.
How about the other direction?
Yeah, the other way, the bridge.
Above.
Oh.
That, pedestrian bridges also have their own cost. I think for the aesthetic and the look we're trying to achieve in the village center in this corridor, that doesn't seem like the right design solution for us to introduce that kind of structure over the roadway.
So one of the strategies, if I could follow up on that, in terms of crossing the road, you've heard us talk about the road diet and eliminating lanes, and a lot of that is about, making the curb-to-curb track for pedestrians or students as short as possible. So as much as we want the park to be as big as it can be and as much trees as it can be, a lot of these road components is really about making that pedestrian crossing as safe as it can be. So generally, we're only a 3-lane cross, which is at the max, which is
Well,
considered to be pretty good.
I guess flipping the idea here from a tunnel or a bridge, does doing this, making it much more pedestrian friendly, do you see that it actually could potentially reduce traffic in this area? I mean, if you're wanting to get somewhere and you know that you're going to be driving on a very narrow street that's designed for pedestrians, you might just go a different direction.
Certainly, and I think that has been, there's a balance that we're trying to achieve here by keeping it open and connected, because that's important for the school district. It's important to keep access there. But you have a larger street in Market Street that makes that same connection. The city's master plan has always called for the extension of Market Street beyond Reynoldsburg New Albany Road to loop back around to Dublin Granville. So we have always prescribed in this belief that we would rather build a strong interconnected system of roads, multiple roads, instead of just one major road, because that's how you disperse traffic better. If you get to like a Hamilton Road, you can keep adding lanes all you want, and you're just going to keep adding traffic. If you build a network, you're going to distribute that.
You're also splitting the community when you build a road that big. That's just my personal opinion.
Absolutely.
But you were pointing. Sorry, Adrian, but he was like showing me how to. So I know that Market Street now extends to 605, but you're actually thinking in the future about. It's Patrick.
It's sensitive.
So it will eventually connect to Dublin Granville.
Yes, it will eventually, the ultimate alignment isn't known, but the city's master plan calls for an extension of the Dublin Granville. That's correct.
Which would be significant.
Yeah, from a traffic perspective.
This would be huge.
So one of the other things we've talked with the city about is we make predictions with these traffic studies that once school starts again in the fall with the shifts that are occurring and the redistribution of traffic, to actually go out and do some additional counts at some of these same intersections that we counted, to just test and make sure what we thought we would see is actually what is occurring. So we've done this with some work we're doing at Easton. Obviously, Easton has lots of traffic, and trying to help them plan for infrastructure improvements. So it actually proved to be very useful after we did some level of study to go back out and do some actual in the field afterwards calibration, if you will, of the modeling. Particularly with that cafeteria drop-off loop closed.
So, sorry, I want one more question, then I'll yield the floor. So we have, particularly for middle school, high school, because there's still a lot of kids that don't, within a close radius of the school, that walk. During this planned construction time, has there been discussion about where these kids who walk to school are going to need to go to get where they need to get to the campus?
I would love to know more about that, and so we can plan for it. If you guys have any sense of the major directions they're coming from, we can certainly make for and plan for temporary pedestrian measures so that they can still walk. I think the ultimate goal, I'm a planner, is to get more kids and more employees, even workers, walking and biking to school and to work, and whatever we can do to facilitate that, we're happy to do.
Are we planning on keeping that bus loop closed permanently?
Yes.
Okay. outside of this being a wonderful addition to the community, I think it's something that will really enhance the lives of students. I know personally, my kids are always walking from the school to the library to Starbucks, and I always kind of cringe because, there is no really easy way to go, and they're still little, and this just provides so much more space for children too. I know they were, all congregating like at Starbucks or all congregating at the library, and I feel like this will help them find new spaces to kind of hang out and be with their friends and not. Yes, study.
Big frappuccino.
But
And that's
I love, how this will enhance the lives of students, because I feel like there has been a missing piece for kids in terms of, thinking about how they travel after school every day and where they're headed, and just opening this they will just love this.
It's such a barrier now. I mean, it really is between the campus and Market Square. And I think that this is really going to take it from these two things that are pointing outward and bring them together. This bridge is, I think it's at 34 feet wide now. I mean, that's a park in and of itself. So I think there's plenty of opportunities. Now everyone's in that little green with those two benches at Market Square. They're going to have plenty. And that's what we need out of this park. We need people in it to activate the space, because that's what also makes it safer. That helps slow cars down. All these things build upon each other to create a really special place, I think, in the Village Center.
So to your question, Mrs. Kalinowski, right now we're slated to close the middle school, high school bus loop effective cafeteria loop July 31st. We're not opening it for the start of the new school year, which means relocating the 20+ staff members that are currently parking there, relocating the athletic drop-off buses, relocating the Pepsi truck that delivers every single day to the middle school, high school cafeteria building, the GFS ice cream truck. All that stuff is in the plan to basically be moved. But that gives us the opportunity, back to Todd's point, in our conversations to actually find out if the traffic study with the closure remains valid. And we need to know that before they continue to move forward. And the only way to do that is to not open for the start of the new school year.
Another question, safety question on the velo path or velo path. Who has the right of way, a pedestrian, students, or the bikes? I know the bikes will be safer away from the cars now, but how about the
Now there
pedestrians?
actually is, I don't know if we could get back to that segment. Could we go back to? Jeff, what's the width between the bike portion and the pedestrian portion
It's 10 feet.
total?
Well, between,
The walkway is 6. Is that what you're asking for?
so it's a 6-foot walkway and an 8-foot path, and then there's a 10-foot
Tree line.
median, if you will, that
There you go. I'm not sure which is the.
That's it.
So, right, so what you have here is our two travel lanes, 10-foot tree lawn between the ped and bike path, and then a 14-foot total bike path. You ask who has the right of way. Pedestrian on foot has the right of way, but
We're providing separate facilities, so the biker should stay in the 8 feet and the pedestrian should stay within the 6 feet walkway, ideally.
I'm just thinking about the crossing, again, there are a lot of these rails, the trails are awesome, but you don't want to be out on them sometimes as a pedestrian because the bikers
Yeah.
are
Right.
biking and.
Yeah.
so I think we'll have the appropriate kind of, safety markings along the trail. And I also think that generally this is a place where folks are, moving a little slower on their bikes just by nature of the amount of, pedestrians on the path, hopefully.
And that's why it was important for us to have that, like, separate spaces for the bikes and for the pedestrians, and hopefully they don't intermingle as much as they might on the walking trail along Johnstown Road, because that's for bikes and for pedestrians.
Thank you. How far east does it extend, the velo Is it Velo or Velo? I'm sorry.
Velo.
Velo loop. Does it go as far east as Bungalow? It looks like it drives off.
Part of that's going to depend on the final disposition of that turn lane. If we have to maintain that turn lane near term, those facilities are going to have to merge somewhere in front of the Bungalow.
The ultimate plan for the Velo Loop is that it would be a 5-mile protected bike lane that would loop, basically go Dublin Granville Road over to Kidsmiller, reconfigure that bridge, go along Smiths Mill Road, and actually have a new pedestrian bike-only bridge over 161. Like, this is long-term, big picture stuff that we'd have to get grants for, but that would make this would be the first segment of that larger loop that would kind of be the hub in a hub and spoke bicycle network for the city. We have no shortage of really big ideas. We just have to nick them off one by one.
We're not thinking, people who want to go out and get a 50-mile bike ride in are not going to be the power riders using this Velo Loop. This may be a way to get them to where they could start a power ride, but it's not for the power ride.
Or you could ride your bike from your home to your office.
Right.
Exactly.
That's exactly what we're trying to do.
Which is,
Or to school.
Or to school.
Or to school. Yeah. So when we did the bike plan, I think 3 years ago, we looked at census data and we had 0 commuters by bicycle in the community. And, we have a large business park. We know we have residents that work in the business park. It just seems like if we had the facilities that we could increase that percentage of commuters.
You can't go down.
Right, we can only go up. We're at a good starting point right now.
On behalf of the school district and the Board of Education, we'd like to thank you for your presentation this evening. And really, for my own personal benefit, really the partnership that's been established between the city that's continued, and really our opportunity to come and actually participate in the conversations to talk about how to increase pedestrian safety from my realm, dominantly for kids. And what we do every single day to serve the 5,000 that are on our school campus. So I think this will be a huge improvement. It's positive in many, many ways, and we look forward to it moving forward. And we will do everything we can to continue to cooperate and be the good partners necessary. We've started the public conversation about closing the middle school, high school cafeteria loop. We will continue to communicate that with our families, but we need to understand that statistically the data that you've collected works before it becomes a permanent solution.
Right. And we're happy, whatever we need to do to help you with that, we're certainly happy to do. And thank you for your time tonight
Thank
and
you.
your
This is
comments.
great, thank you.
Exciting.
It's exciting.
Next item, permanent improvement levy resolutions of necessity.
Becky.
Ms. Jenkins.
Thank you. So we have been talking with you for a few months now about the capital plan that we've put together. We've come back with a couple different iterations. Taking you back to the last conversation was the 5-year capital plan, showing that we have an average need that we've identified over the next 5 years of $2.5 million, and that we currently spend approximately $1.3 million out of the general fund. So we have not changed that plan. That's the same plan that we've had. Then we want to talk about,
Patrick, will you put up the other PDF of the other chart, please?
we also then brought to you at the last board meeting, I think we had 7 different resolutions of necessity, and the board passed 5 of them. So I put together the summary of options to show, first of all, what the average need is. On the left-hand side of this sheet, you can see the $2.5 million that we talked about in the capital planning presentation. Then on the right-hand side, you can see that we have 2.5 mils of debt millage rolling off December 31 of 2017, which collects currently about $2.3 million. We had the 5 different options that passed. Levy option 1 was 1 mil. It brings in about $938,000. If we would pass that levy, then what you see to the column next to that is that we would still need to spend about $1.6 million out of the general fund to meet that average cost of $2.5 million. Option 2, 1.25 mils was $1.1 million. again, we would need 1.3 million from the general fund. Option 3 is 1.5, $1.4 million collected, 1.1 still needed from the general fund. The 1.75 option is $1.6 million, or still needing 899,000 from general fund. And then 2 mills is the last option that was passed, and that would bring in $1.8 million, and still needing about 665,000 from the general fund. Now, there is the 6th option, which is the board could choose to put no levy on the ballot, in which case we would need to come up with that 2.5 million annually from the general fund, presuming that we actually go forward with all of the items on that capital plan that we've identified as needs in the district. But wanted to put this summary together so that you didn't have to read through all of the resolutions that I sent out on Friday, and then also the letters that came back from the county auditor's office certifying the amount of money that would come from that. Then we also wanted to put together a comparison of what does that mean to our taxpayers. So showing what the 2.5 mills currently cost someone with a $350,000 home, that's about the average home cost in the district, is the annual cost right now is $267.97, or a monthly cost of $22.33. Now, I want to note that levies passed prior to 2015 included the rollback homestead reduction. So the taxpayer got a reduction of 12.5%, and then the state would reimburse the difference. Levies passed after that will not have that reimbursement. So the taxpayer will actually pay the full cost of the levy going forward. So I have included that in that calculation.
Can you do me a favor? Could you just explain what the homestead reduction is?
The homestead reduction is that if you're living in your house and it's your homestead, there was a reduction of 10%. Going forward, that actually has changed so that there are specific requirements. So you have to meet an age and an income requirement before that kicks in. So that goes away. That went away with the last biennial budget. With any new levies. So as these roll off, if we choose to replace, that's why I wanted to show this comparison, what the difference looks like for the taxpayer.
Right. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that at one point in time, the state basically gave you a 12.5% break
Correct.
on your taxes.
Correct.
That's no longer in effect.
No. That was taken away 2 years ago, and that's all levy types, not just permanent improvement or debt. So then if you go down through, you can see the differences between the 5 different options that we have and what does it look like for the taxpayer. And I should also say that 1 mil per $100,000 is $35 per year. But so these are the differences. If you pass the 2 mil levy, there would be a reduction annually of $22.97 or $1.91 a month. And it goes clear to, if you pass the 1 mil, taxpayers would still see a reduction in their tax obligation of $145.47. And then varying levels in between there.
And that was assuming the 350,000.
Yeah, those are, I'm sorry, yes, those are all assuming $350,000 average cost.
Okay, so just going back 101 here. Can we just go back and explain to people what is happening at the end of this year with the debt service millage rolling off?
So the district, over a period of time, has had to finance the buildings and the capital improvements in the district. So if you put parking lots in, the buildings that are built, those kinds of things. You ladder that debt. So over a period of 30 years, like, so if we think about the intermediate school, we financed that building over a 28-year period, and every year you have some portion of that that's being paid. These pieces, the 2.5 mills that are rolling off in December, are from buildings, you know, the K1, the high school, the middle school, those buildings that were built many, many years ago. Some of that debt is now starting to roll off. It's not the entire building being paid off, but it's a major portion of that debt. So as that debt is paid off, the millage is no longer needed to be collected. And so that's where we're saying in December 31, we've made enough of these payments that 2.5 mils is coming off of the debt millage or the tax obligation that would have been passed, 30 years ago to build these buildings. It's very similar to a house payment. As you pay that principal, and interest, then your principal lowers so that you finally get to pay that off.
So we are getting to a point in time where we have financed buildings for a fairly significant period of time, 25, 30 years. Not unlike a mortgage. Those payments are done or coming done, but we still have ownership of the property.
Correct.
Which means there are, like anybody who has a house that's 20 or 30 years old, there are repairs.
Yes,
There are windows that need replaced. There's whatever else that happened. We all know, we all live here. We know that there are things that happen.
I had water running in my door in my office today. So
Right.
things need fixed.
So, yeah. Well, it was raining quite
It
hard.
was really good, yes.
So for taxpayers, I just want to make sure people understand, if you're a taxpayer in this district, at the end of this year, you will have millage that's rolling off that would reduce your tax burden.
Correct.
And what we're talking about here is a portion of those dollars that would potentially be rolled into a permanent improvement levy to allow us to continue to pay for the improvements to these buildings, which the taxpayers have frankly already paid for.
Right.
So from an investment
They've already paid
perspective.
for the buildings. They haven't already paid for.
Right, that's what I mean. So, but from an investment perspective, we've asked the community and they've generously given us their dollars over the last 30 years to fund the buildings. Now we have these buildings, they're getting old, they need some repairs. So what we're asking for, what we're talking about here is the ability to have the resources to make those improvements, to make sure that the investment that they made 30 years ago doesn't go into complete disaster.
Correct, which is something that you might do on your own home. So if you pay it off, you might still put all or some portion of the payment that you were making away so that when the roof needs repaired, it's not a huge burden. So it's very similar. So the board now needs to discuss. We can only approve one of these options,
If any.
if any, on the July 25th board meeting. That's the board meeting that you have to pass the resolution to proceed if you want to be on the November ballot. So we need guidance. It's not advisable to bring all 5 of them back, because if you pass the first one, whichever one you list on the agenda, that's the one that has to go, because you can't pass 5 of them. So only one of these options, if you're going to decide to go on the ballot in November, can be moved forward in 2 weeks.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to ask you all to jump in. Right now, according to this one sheet, with the 5-year capital planning projects, you note on here that today out of GRF, we're spending $1.3 million
Correct.
generally. Or we're taking that out of the general revenue fund to fund projects.
Correct.
Under the option summary, under permanent improvement levy, option 2, which is a 1.25 mil.
Mm-hmm.
You have 1.17 generated from the tax revenue, and then the amount needed from the general revenue fund is 1.368.
Correct.
So if we approved option levy option 2 at 1.25, it would be the same.
There would be no difference.
There'd be no difference from our GRF that we have right now,
Correct.
because we'd still need to transfer 1.3 million.
Correct. You have to maintain what you're currently doing and then generate an additional 1.1 as a PI request to then meet the average spend of the 2.5 million. But yes, to your point, you would spend what you're currently spending today in the same way.
And what would that mean for our general revenue fund over the next 5 years? I know we're not at a point of, we had a 5-year forecast in May, there'll be another one in October, but
Is this the number that's currently in the 5-year forecast?
Yes.
Which, the 1.3 or the
The
2.5?
1.3. The 1.3 is what we've had in the forecast.
Okay, so what's in our current forecast would stay virtually the same,
Mhm.
but you would have to have the 1.25.
Right. If you didn't have the 1.25 mil or the $1.1 million, then, as we discussed, we have the high school roof that we're going to have to do something with next year. That's $2.2 million. So we have 1.3 in, and that's not all for a roof, right? So the 1.3 includes buses, it's technology, it's other items that happen in the district. That's not just for the roof. So you'd have to come up with where's that $2.2 million plus then these other things that we have to do.
So where would this hypothetical question, if there was no levy, then where would the other 1.17 come from?
Out of the ending cash balance of the general fund,
Which would mean,
which would then either increase the levy ask for operating dollars the next time we go, or cause us to go sooner, or both, or we'd have to cut in some other area. And I don't know, that we have $2 million to cut easily to fund that. So the more money that you're taking out of the general fund for these kinds of items, the sooner you're coming back to the voters for money, and the more it's going to be, the higher the millage will be for the operating costs. If you don't do the PI levy now, in the future, you don't have this big of a drop from the debt service millage. So you don't have an offsetting millage drop to help offset the increase in taxes.
That 2019 number is a huge bump up, the 4.3.
That's the roof.
yeah,
How do we plan for that?
Which sheet are you looking at?
The plan.
The capital?
5-year capital planning projects where, it's double the cost in that year.
So it's an average, the 2.5. So what you would do is continue to build that balance until you get to that year. If it's 2019, the other thing that we could do is cash flow borrowing. So we know that we're passing a levy, we could borrow the funds and then pay it back within the year as you collect the payment.
So we don't have to dig deeper into the general fund for that.
Not if you've passed the permanent improvement levy.
I mean, at the
The other
1.25, we'd basically be static.
Yes.
There'd be essentially no change to our 5-year forecast, and we'd have the additional funds to do some of these major repairs.
Correct.
If we can only borrow money to do these things if we pass the levy, that's our ORC, right? So we can't borrow,
Asset-based lending.
right, but we can't borrow money, like
Something
just
to borrow
because the
against.
general fund would have to pay for it, you can't go out and borrow the money because you have a general fund cash flow.
Understood.
There's a specific time period once you pass a levy that you can do cash flow borrowing.
The only other potential there, Mrs. Kalinowski, is the reality that the 2.2 that's represented for the high school building roofs was the maximum cost that was anticipated in the conversations with the contractors. So again, going through whatever the bid procedure is for competitive purposes and going out and awarding and finding out what the actual scope of work is, metal versus shingle, and then what does that look like for which part of the buildings specifically, it may not be 2.2. So it could be less than that, but we have to forecast potentially if that is the maximum liability, what does that mean for us?
And this also includes what Mr. Voss talked about in terms of the upgrades he feels we need.
Mm-hmm.
That's all in the item,
Yeah, that's all
the
listed.
5-year capital planning projects page.
We can always come up with, and I'll just say this because Mike's in the room, but Mike can always come up with more technical or technology infrastructure replacement. We could never have enough money for technology from our students' perspective and probably from our teachers' perspective. We are behind, to say it kindly, on our technology integration and upgrades within our school campus based upon choices that were made historically that we're now trying to rectify.
And that estimate will bring us to where we think we should be.
it will make significant progress, yes.
This is a pretty important, I know we have a little bit more time. We have 2 more weeks. But be curious for anybody else's thoughts on where we are, what you're thinking. I mean, the point that Mr. Darrow makes is a good one, that 1.25 allows us to kind of basically keep status quo. The only other question that I would have, and not that we need to make one decision based on another, but and who knows what happens in the next 3 years, but if we're looking at the potential of a operating levy at some point in the next 3 or 4 years, 2020 or 21, curious what that number might look like from an operating perspective based on the numbers that we're looking at today.
With no other changes, now I will say that we're updating the forecast because we did hear from the Franklin County Auditor that our revow, I have a 4% increase. It's actually going to come in at 11%. What that means for the district is while all voted millages are rolled back, your inside millage is not. So there will be some tax increase based on that increase.
Tax revenue increase.
Yes, tax revenue increase based on that revow number being 11%.
That doesn't mean people's homes, it doesn't mean their taxes are going to go up 11%, right?
No,
Just
no.
to be clear.
Yes.
Right.
Actually, what they told us was that we anticipate about a 1.5% increase in taxes for homeowners. But that's an average, so some will go up higher, some will go up lower. They didn't tell us what areas were going up faster than others. It's based on sales, market sales. So my guess is that the homes that are selling are typically 500,000 and less. Those are going to have a higher increase in their values than some of the more expensive homes. But we do have that. So once we update the forecast with all of the reductions that we've made this year, which were significant, and then with some of those revenue increases, I expect that when we get to about 2020, 2021, we'll need some kind of levy, and it is probably about a 5 mil or more.
Based on
And that
what?
would be a 4-year period. That would be based on a 4-year period in 2020 if you collect it 100%. Based on all things, that the expenses stay about where they are in the forecast as we had them in May, and then with those additional dollars in revenue.
Does that have any assumption, though, around this permanent improvement?
It keeps the permanent, so the 5-year forecast currently keeps that $1.3 million as an average in the forecast. It doesn't assume that we've taken any of that out, and it doesn't assume that we've passed a 2 mil levy and we can take a piece of that out.
But it does assume the 12.7.
2.5, right. That
Okay,
1.25 would keep
So
everything that Becky said the same and allow us to repair the roof and make needed infrastructure or IT infrastructure improvements and everything else
But we
that's listed
did-
on this page.
That's if you pass the 1.25. If you do nothing, the 5-year forecast, general fund has just the 1.3 in there. So we would have to figure out where does that other money come from, which could impact what an operating levy would look like in about 20
Back to John's question, though, where you said we would need a 5 mil operating levy. Does that assume any permanent improvement levy getting passed? Because that would have direct impact on it.
Wait a minute.
Because it's-
It would be 1.25.
Right, it's going to presume that.
If we spend this additional money, if we spend the money that's on this,
Right.
Right.
then yes, we would need
Would
the
assume the
extra, we would need the
1.25.
1.25 millage in permanent improvements for Becky's numbers to hold. If we don't pass if we don't pass at least a 1.25 mil PI levy, then we wouldn't be able to do this extra. Or if we did do this extra
You'd have
work, then it would be higher millage or sooner. because we'd run out of money.
Right.
We have to find somewhere else to cut to pay for it.
Okay.
Right.
So then the question is, and I'd love to hear everybody's opinion, is then, are we, because at some point, you know, it's, what's the Dylan song? You got to pay whatever. Right? There's the Bob Dylan song, right?
Sure.
Huh?
We couldn't
Name that
understand
tune?
what he was singing.
I'm a few bars. Let's see if we can get it.
All right. There is a Dylan song. All right. Anyway.
Telling.
Huh?
That's very telling about you.
Anyway, if we, you're right, there is this sheet, which I'm guessing this is online that people can see it.
The
No.
chart that illustrates the 5-year capital improvement projections and project planning list is available on our website.
Okay,
We posted that after the board presentation.
okay.
And a lot of this is not optional stuff. I want people to understand this is stuff we have to
The
do.
roof's gonna have to get fixed.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's leaking, so the roof's gonna have to get fixed.
So it has to be paid for out of something.
It's either going to be paid on a permanent improvement or it's coming out of the general revenue fund.
Right.
And my concern is this, and I really would like people's opinion on this. I want people to understand that we want to be very fiscally responsible. I mean, we're not here to just spend tax dollars for the fun of it. But I also, you know, from past history, we know that when you have a levy that's 6, 7, 8 mils, that's real tough for people to swallow. So if you're talking about a 1.25 mil levy now and a 5 mil levy later,
In three or 4 years.
well, yeah, if we say, let's just, for the sake of argument, say 20, that's 3 years from now. One, I want people to understand why we're doing it. And two, try to do it in a way that is palatable to people from a tax perspective. I mean, we're all 5 of us are taxpayers too. So I'm curious what you guys think about that as it relates to, you know, the fact that it's at some point in time, these bills come due on our district. And I do want to say, and, you know, I give Michael and Becky a lot of credit. We have, and with a lot of the leadership from the members of this board, we've done a pretty good job, I think, over the last couple of years of being very fiscally responsible and making a lot of cost savings in a lot of different areas that have allowed us to continue to stretch things out. We haven't asked for a levy or haven't needed a levy since 2012, or passed a levy since 2012, I should say. It'd be great if it could go even longer, but it's just not reality as it relates to school funding. So what do you guys think about allocating money specifically for the purposes of maintaining the facilities that we have here versus holding off, but then potentially having to ask for more later?
So my view on this is, given the age of our physical facilities, having some money set aside specifically for maintenance of physical facilities and other permanent improvements that are necessary for the district, I think that's important. I agree that we've made, over the last couple of years, we've made some very significant improvements in how this district operates. We are spending our money much more wisely. With the most recent contract negotiations, we have saved money and stabilized the district's financing further. Michael and Becky have done yeoman's work with their teams to only spend money that's necessary. Even if it's budgeted, it's not necessarily spent. So we saved at least another $560,000 this year that essentially is compounding over the next years. So we've done very good work. Where I come down in terms of the amount of permanent improvement is, I think taxpayers deserve a break. So the fact that we have 2.5 mils rolling off, I want to make sure that taxpayers get the most of that back as possible, because I think it's important that that taxpayers get some money back. So I come down on the smallest amount of millage necessary to enable us to do the repairs that we know we have to do that are over and above the typical run rate. And that keeps us where we're headed, which is an operating levy not needed till at least 2020 at this point, maybe 21, maybe 22. It could be 10 years potentially that we've gone without an operating levy, given all the improvements we've made. At the same time, we're making improvements in student outcomes. I mean, this is how effective governance should work. So I come down on the number that essentially allows us to keep that train going in that direction and still keeps us lean. I'm concerned that I want to return money to taxpayers when this bond millage rolls off, and I want to keep things lean so that there continues to be incentive to continue to save money. So for me, that comes down to the 1.25 mils. That's half the number. Taxpayers get half that millage back.
Paul?
I take a view that we have, the good news is for the taxpayers in the Albany Plain Local Schools, you're going to get a tax cut beginning in 2018. Thank you for all the investments you've made since 1990. I wasn't here in 1995 or 4, or whenever those were all passed and we built the schools. So that's the good news is in 2018 there's going to be a tax cut. I keep it simple. I view it also as we all are homeowners. Some of us have a mortgage, some of us don't have it anymore, and you still have to maintain the house. So I want to look at this as an example of what is it going to take to help maintain facilities that help us achieve the best academic and developmental outcomes for each of our students. And I think that helps with our teaching, our educators who want to live and work in a great community and live and work in great facilities. And it has something to our students. We need to have technology that will keep current with the times. I mean, this is New Albany. We're looking to achieve great academic and developmental outcomes for our students. We can't fall behind on technology. I know that we have some items in this budget, and I know that this group, I believe, will challenge them and make sure we're spending our money wisely. So I look at this from a standpoint of where I would be sitting 2 years ago when I wasn't on this board, and I would say, great news, we're getting a tax cut. I hear this board is talking about asking for funds for maintenance and repair of aging facilities, and I'd be asking, are these necessary? And do I trust our superintendent and the board to spend my taxpayer dollars wisely? So I think with the work that has been alluded to over the past several years, I hope that we have the community's trust in our board and in our leadership that we're going to do only what's necessary to maintain excellent facilities, and also that we have their trust that we'll spend it wisely and not just put it in the budget and spend it because it's there. So with those two things in mind, I certainly am supportive of a levy asking the community to share back some of that savings that they'll be realizing in 2018. The question is, how much do we have to share back? And I go back to probably what is my position from the beginning. We want to be financially sustainable. We want to take this long-term view, but at the same time, only spend what's necessary. And I look at the schedule and say, okay, we've got a 5-year forecast that's mandated by the state law that we have a 5-year forecast. We've got roughly $1.3 million that we spend out of our general revenue fund. Our leadership team is saying we need $2.5 million annually to get the necessary upgrades, and that 1.25 will roughly help us get there without impacting our mandated 5-year forecast. I don't want to talk about, in my view, yes, we have to look forward to the time when this board will have to go back and ask about an operating levy. I think a lot of things can change in 3 years. We see a tremendous amount of growth and residential growth in the business park. So I think for right now, is this a good decision to move forward with something around the 1.25? I could see myself being in a position to support that. I welcome community feedback on all this. To some degree, I feel like this is it's a necessary expense to maintain excellent schools, and that's what I'm trying to achieve here. And I think that the board and community supports excellent schools and a good environment to live and work in.
Debbie?
I agree with everything Phil and Paul have already said. I see the 1.25 as the right option. It's what we have planned for in our 5-year forecast. I think it's fair to the taxpayers and us as a school board and you as administrators to stick to that plan. I think it would be irresponsible, honestly, not to have some permanent improvement levy right now because it just puts too much at risk from our general fund and the basic day-to-day operations of the school. So I support option number 2 for the 1.25.
Like,
I am also in very large agreement with all the comments that people have made. I don't want it to be missed by the community that we've been budgeting and spending 1.3 million a year from the general revenue fund to make permanent improvements happen on this campus. So it's not like that money's been coming from a dedicated area. It's been coming from a fund that, is largely going to be needed to continue to support just our operating platform as we move forward in the future. So while agree, we stay status quo with needing to hit the 2.5 million per year on the planned capital projects. And if we go with the 1.25 mil, we stay that status quo and being able to do it. We're staying status quo by continuing to suck out 1.3 million from the general revenue fund. That also assumes, and I've only been here a short time, but it assumes that everything we've laid out on the 5-year roadmap is all that pops up. And a lot of things have popped up in my 2 months here. So it's a conservative view. It's conservative for sure. The buildings are getting old. They're like between 16 and 21 years or something like that. So, for people in the community who do live in older homes, I'm sure you understand all of a sudden things start happening. So I think, we're starting to see that on campus and agree with some of the comments made by other board members. I think it's our fiscal responsibility to make sure that we maintain the proper maintenance of these buildings. There's a huge investment by the community to build them. We need to keep them operating at the right level. And that's only going to further improve the education that happens within these walls as well. So I can get to a place of 1.25, but I can also get to a place, honestly, of even slightly higher than that, knowing that this is conservative, knowing that we are continuing to still suck dollars out of the general revenue fund to pay for the permanent improvements. So I pay taxes too. I want to get dollars back. And I think that this board and administration have done a lot to demonstrate that we are being fiscally responsible with the dollars. We are stretching every dollar we have, and somewhere in that 1.2 to 1.5 feels right to me.
So just a slight challenge, and this is kind of funny because this is probably the first time that anyone ever considered me the most liberal in the group. But the only thing I want to throw out there from just a thought perspective is, well, I'm in agreement with everyone here, and if 1.25 is where the majority of the board is, I'm comfortable being there. My only concern is this. Two things. So it's two concerns. One, there's always the potential that crazy things could happen, and we've seen that happen. There's nothing in here about a boiler exploding, which could happen. There's nothing in here about taking the hot water and reversing it to, or was it cold water, reversing it to hot water
through the cold water pipes.
So we've been putting Band-Aids on this school district for a while. And so I have a little bit of concern there. My only other piece, and you're right, both Paul and Phil, you said it, who knows what 3 years from now is going to look like. I totally understand that and I respect that. But I also know that at some point in the future, because of the way that schools are funded in this state, we are going to have to go back to the voters at some point. And to ask for an operating levy at a higher level than we need to, because we wanted to be a little bit more conservative on a PI levy, I just want to throw it out there, and we can have the debate. I can go either way. But I also like the idea of having a permanent improvement levy where we can look people in the eye and say, your money is being spent specifically on these things, so that when we go back and ask for general revenue later, that's for the general revenue of the district. But we have put a Band-Aid on this thing by taking money out of the general revenue fund for the last several years. And it's worked. I mean, can't complain about that. You guys have done it, figured out ways to make it work. But that also means we've had to be creative when we don't necessarily have to be. If we had a permanent improvement fund, that again, people knew exactly what it was for. So again, I'm fine at 1.25 if that's where everyone wants to be. I'm comfortable at 1.5 too, knowing that I can also go to people and say that money is specifically going to these things that we've asked you for. So
I guess my question along these lines is, how realistic is this chart? You know, I mean,
It's a forecast. It's the best. I mean, I think it's the best information we have today. It's conservative. Because
It is conservative.
Yeah, because it's the maximum amount the roof is going to cost. It could be $750,000 less. So, I mean, that's completely replacing the roof all the way down to the studs or the rafters or however it's built.
Actually, it's multiple roofs, but just the A building itself for the high school gymnasium and the pool is $700,000 for the new metal roof. So we were conservative when we met with the vendors or the experts to go through and look at the roofs, the boilers, do the new assessments, to actually update the information that was previously requested by the board to come back. And we went to the higher end knowing that there could be a liability, to John's point, that's unknown. So we want to build in some conservative estimate of what else should we be considering to do our due diligence. And that's really what these numbers represent.
Is it safe to say, Becky, that if a PI levy is a quarter of a point, a quarter of a mil, more or less, that would be the same difference on an operating levy in the future? Okay, so.
Now, the only caveat I would say is that you're talking about tax values now versus
understand.
tax values. So
I understand.
If it was completely the same, then yes, it doesn't matter whether it's PI operating.
So I think to some of John's comments, my view there is that I still want to return as much to taxpayers today as possible. And B, when I look at permanent improvements, it isn't just the ongoing maintenance. Ongoing maintenance I view as operating dollars. Oil change in the car is an operating expense. Rebuilding the engine, if that's ever required, that's a capital improvement. So I look at what we're considering asking taxpayers for is to fund those things that are capital improvements that have a life of at least 5 years, that are more than just the regular ongoing maintenance stuff.
Sure.
So
bad choice of words.
no.
Yeah, the only thing I'm saying here, guys, and ladies, people, guys is just a general term.
We're not.
When I'm
Ladies
home,
and gentlemen.
when I'm home in Pittsburgh, I just say yins. I want people to understand that if we're asking for this now, that's fine. But in 2021, whatever it is, if instead of a 4 mil levy, it's a 4.5 or a 5, that people understand.
It would be a 4, or given the numbers we're talking about, it'd be a 4 or 4.25.
Not necessarily if you're talking about 3 years from now when we've spent down.
The property values are likely going up.
Well, again, there's all kinds. You're right. There's all kinds of potential. But I'm just saying it's a number now or it's a number later. And so I personally like the idea of being able to say this specifically is for capital improvements. Again, a quarter point, fine. I mean, I can live with either way. I mean, I'm fine with going with the board, but I just want it to be on the record, though, that 1.25 now could mean 4.5 later instead of 4 or 4.25. And as long as people understand what that means, and the community is willing to have that conversation with us, I'm good.
I think just to add to what you're saying, John, I mean, we legitimately should be asking for a 2.5 permanent improvement levy is what we should be asking for to not suck any dollars out of the general revenue fund. That is how fiscally tight this group is being, that we're talking about 1.25 or 1.5, right? So that difference there is probably shortening the bridge of funds that we have between now and whenever the next levy, the operating levy, needs to come up.
With keeping it the same as our 5-year forecast.
You will continue to expend, using that example, in the next 3 years, $3.9 million out of the general revenue fund. To Phil's point, you have it forecasted, it's built into your existing budget, but to your end, you are reducing the operating budget in the long term because you're choosing to spend it on a general revenue fund to make the capital improvements that are necessary to maintain the facilities. But that has been the practice to date.
Yes.
To your
Totally get that we've been.
Well,
doing
okay,
that
you could
today,
flip, yeah, but you could flip this whole thing on its head and say, okay, we're gonna do a 2.5 operating or permanent improvement levy now, but then when we go back for an operating levy in 2 or 3 years, it's tiny because that's just operating.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
So-
My point for the
Yeah.
folks at home is to understand, I mean, we're being really tight now. And if we were really just trying, to your point, to earmark expenses to a permanent improvement levy and dollars, we would be coming back, when we need to for an operating levy, with a different number. So it's just, I mean, it's all the same money. It's all the same
It's
money.
just the one. Another factor to keep in mind is that we're doing this for a 5-year period. So over that 5-year period, we're going to understand how conservative or not was this, what things popped up that we weren't expecting, what did we have to push off because those things popped up. We're going to manage this the same way that we have with the general fund, and the way we're doing that. So in 5 years, we may look at this plan, update it, and say, okay, now the 1.25 is not going to be enough, and we're taking way too much out of the general fund. We want it to really be earmarked, and so maybe in 5 years, you replace this with a 1.5 or a 1.75 or whatever the number might be at that time. Because then you also have more buildings getting older and having more of these issues.
Or we may find out, again, the
You
opposite.
don't, right?
We may find
We
out that
didn't
we were more conservative, and again, the management over that period was even better and found ways of doing it better, so.
So in this list, there's not a lot of wiggle room.
There's no frills.
Yeah.
We've been truly realistic to the current end of life and/or end of usable reality of the asset. And to Phil's point, it has to be an asset that's going to have a 5-year or greater lifespan in order to qualify as a capital asset for permanent improvement in the school district under this funding source.
I'm glad you raised the point about it being a 5-year levy, because the permanent improvement refers to the types of improvements to be made, not to the fact that it's a
Permanent levy.
It is not a permanent tax.
5-year proposal.
Yeah,
Right.
there is a
That's a good
permanent
point.
improvement levy
Good
that
point.
could be permanent. We are not asking for that. In our entire conversation we've had since it was introduced, it's a 5-year plan to basically hold ourselves accountable for our public, and to go back and explain, to John's point, once it's funded, it can only be used for specific assets that have a greater life cycle than 5 years.
But the levy is for a 5-year period.
Correct. It is not a forever ask.
So at this point, we have a little bit more time. The 24th is when we have.
Let's talk about the timeline. So by statute, in order to be on the November ballot, the board must take action to permit Becky to file the resolution of necessity, the certifications from the state auditor, and your second resolution to authorize the ballot language prior to August 9th. The deadline to file with the Board of Elections is August 9th. The board meeting between now and that date is July 24th. That's why we said it would be at the last meeting of July. Should the board not be ready, then you will be required to have a special meeting if you choose to act prior to the August 9th date, because you do not have a board meeting between July 24th and the August 9th filing deadline with the Board of Elections.
We'd have to have a special meeting.
You would have a special meeting. But the filing deadline, just for complete transparency, is August 9th with the Board of Elections.
Also, the next resolution actually takes a supermajority, so all four of,
4/5.
if it's not 5-0, it has to be at least 4 of you voting to put it on the ballot. The resolutions of necessity only took 3, but the resolution to proceed takes at least 4, if not all 5.
Guys, one final question I meant to ask earlier today, and if you don't know the answer, we'll find it. This is good news that the 2.5 mills is rolling off. Is there a schedule that we can look forward to in terms of additional millage rolling off in future years?
Yes, I can send that out. We don't have any more big drops like this. It's consistent, smaller drops.
Smaller ones add up?
Yes, they do.
They do.
There's just no,
This is a unique
But I can send
opportunity
that
to
out,
fund
absolutely.
permanent improvement in a different way.
All right, we've probably exhausted it for now. So, all right.
Fine. Becky and I will continue to follow up with you individually because, again, you can't have a board conversation relative to this topic to conduct business outside the scope of your board meetings. So we will just have individual conversations with you to seek additional information or offer clarification for any additional questions you have. And then we'll prep for the board meeting just like we always do with John prior to July 24th to determine what gets added to the agenda.
Next item is public participation. And with no one at the moment, move on to superintendent items, and I believe we can take them all at one
Including the
time.
addendum, A and B.
Yes, including the addendum. So could I have just a motion, please?
So moved.
Ms. Kalinowski,
Second.
Mr. Newmoff, and Mr. Sawyers.
Thank you. We begin this evening with personnel action items or standard employment action items between the last board meeting and ultimately this evening for new hires for the 2017-18 school year. Once again, despite the fact that we've received a few resignations, we will be fully staffed after the action recommendations this evening. The most recent one, and she's here and she sat through the entire meeting, so I want to acknowledge her, is Michelle Howard. She will become a new occupational therapist within our school district, beginning with the 2017-18 school year. So Michelle, we welcome you and applaud you. And David also works in the school district for making it through the entire meeting to get to the action items where you, hopefully through board approval of my recommendation, will be hired this evening to become our new occupational therapist. The board policy sections I've talked about prior to during the update today, but you have recommendations for the approval of revocation of policy 8120. This is a result of House Bill 487 eliminating the requirement of the hiring process associated to the terrorist organizations for declaration. So this actually came out of a House bill. We are now catching up based upon that, but you will revoke policy 8120 this evening because it's no longer permissible by law to have that as a term and condition of employment. The 5,000 series for action this evening are to update board policies relative to students, to update handbooks so that we can present handbooks at your next meeting for the 2017-18 school year. And again, the federal requirement for free and reduced lunch for children in foster care are on the agenda this evening. For general business, we have a few items. The first is we apologize, but we did miss a fee at the last meeting for AP Spanish at the high school, and we need the ability to charge for the AP Spanish course. So we have one action item specifically for that, and then a couple technology items on the addendum agenda to approve to continue to help Mr. Voss move the technology department forward within our school district.
I just have a question because I'm reading the policy change. Would you just explain, Michael, under the current policy, was the district required to ask potential hires if they were rendering assistance?
You actually had to fill out a form that was required by the federal government to basically declare that you were or were not a terrorist. So
Okay.
that has now been revoked under federal and state statute through House Bill 487. So we can no longer give them that form to declare if they have any terrorist interests.
Okay.
But it was a pre-employment requirement for education in the United States.
Okay.
It has now been revoked.
So we're not allowed to do it.
No.
Gotcha.
But we ask a multitude of other questions on our employment application that would alert us.
Well, I can't
there would be
imagine a
some
terrorist
concern.
would self-declare. So I don't know how effective it was anyway, but
But it was a requirement to have a specific form that they were required to do a checkbox and sign. So there actually was a specific action required in order to process the person for employment.
gotcha. Thank you.
That is now revoked. And I would agree with you. I would think common sense would say,
I mean, Michelle could have been.
I'm not going anywhere near any of that. I'm just saying.
but we did not create that as a school district, for the record. It was done to us and we had to follow the mandate. It has now been rescinded.
Any other questions? Okay. Before this.
My father thought his occupational therapist was really quite difficult, so I suppose you're right. There you go.
She works with children, so she's not.
A roll call, please.
Ms. Kalinowski,
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff.
Yes.
Mr. Bush,
Yes.
Vice President Darrow,
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes. I'll now entertain a motion to enter into executive session as permitted by section 121.22G4 of the Ohio Revised Code for the purpose of considering the evaluation of a public employee or official.
So moved.
Mr. Darrow,
Second.
Mr. Bush, roll call, please.
Vice President Darrow,
Yes.
Mr. Bush,
Yes.
Mr. Newmoff,
Yes.
Ms. Kalinowski.
Yes.
President McClellan.
Yes, and there will be no additional action following executive session, so thank you all for joining us tonight.
And just for your educational humor, so you can understand what Mr. McClellan was trying to help all of us understand, in 2012, one of the top 50 songs in the United States was Pay in Blood by Bob Dylan.
Here, I thought he was blowing in the wind.
And if you go to YouTube, you can actually watch the video or listen to the lyrics performed by a wide variety of different artists.